Morning, everybody. I'm running the show today from the control room as well as in front of the camera. So I'm gonna just double check and make sure things are going through okay. I can see your comments in the chat. So if anybody would just give me a quick message either on Facebook or YouTube and tell me if you can see me and hear me okay, I'd appreciate it. It's kind of weird. We've been doing these Zoom calls, so I'm used to seeing your faces, and this is a little bit different, kind of just like being speaking into the void. Hi, Sally. Thank you. Awesome. Great. Well, I'm really glad to be with you guys today. And morning, everybody. Oh, I'm coming through on my iPad too. Just a second. Okay. Yeah, this is a talk I've been excited about giving for a while, and I also got really nervous about it because I started putting it together, and I really felt like I bit off way more than I could chew on this one. So, but then I yesterday and the day before I started working through it, and with the help of Rinpoche, I believe, and his blessings, everything really kind of came together to where I feel pretty confident this morning that things will go at least passably well. So first, I want to say that this has been a really beautiful weather week here in Columbus, and we had the good fortune, Lama Kathy and I, of going down to the KTC site and actually going into the shrine room. Like, we actually went into the building and got to kind of look around and meet with the construction guys and the architect, and it was really awesome. So I have a couple pictures that I was going to share. Let's see. So here we go. So this was the other day. Here, I'll get rid of this writing. There we go. So as you can see, that's on the side of the building. And then, can I change this? Still figuring all this tech out. And here we are inside the shrine room. You can see the city in the back. This is looking east. There's Lama Kathy on the right. This is looking the other direction. So we're looking basically westward here. And this would be looking basically south, southwest. Looking back north again. You can see it is if it looks a little big, it is, which is kind of cool. There's the city. We won't. This will actually be where the shrine is. So if we jump back here, just to the right of where you see the people standing is where the shrine will be. So this view here will actually be the shrine will actually be right in front of this view, the main shrine. And then I actually got to take a ride up on the crane. So this was actually above the building, looking down into the shrine room through the cupola and out over the city. And so it was a really, really beautiful day. It was really exciting. I'm happy I can share some of these pictures with you. And so, yeah, that was great. And I also want to say, I know a lot of you were able to go to Lama Lodro's teaching this weekend. I was able to be there Friday, but I had a lot of preparation to do for this talk yesterday, so I wasn't able to be there. But we are all so grateful to Lama Lodro. She's always been a big friend of Columbus KTC, and we thank her so much for her help in teaching and helping us to raise funds for the center. She's been a huge help, and it's been a huge help to me personally, even in the retreat. So very grateful. And Meanwhile, actually, since I did share about the building, I should also share the link to help support rebuilding. So that's you'll see that at the bottom there. So there's where you can go if you want to help continue to support the costs of the construction. And we're moving into the phase where we're working on the shrine design and the floors and the pillars and beams that will be in the shrine room. So let's move on and do the Refuge Prayer. Today, I want to do the Refuge Prayer thinking in terms of taking refuge in what is true, because what finally kind of put this in order for me, this talk today, was thinking about the concept of ground, path, and fruition, which is a common construction in Tibetan Buddhist teachings. And so the ground here that we're going to be working with today is really understanding our confusion, understanding that we are confused and understanding how we're confused. And so what I want to kind of take refuge in today, and the aspect that I want to think about is, taking refuge in what is true. Refuge is something we do all week long. It's kind of what drives most of the things we do, but most of the time we take refuge in things that are not really a good refuge. If we think of refuge as being safety, like wanting some sort of protection or safety, most of the things that we take refuge in, they're impermanent. I mean, if they're external, if they're things that try to feed or indulge our desires, they're going to end. And if they're, abusive to ourselves or hurtful to ourselves or others, obviously that's not good either. So I think when we take refuge, we're really kind of resetting that compass towards what's right and true. And in this case, we're taking refuge in the Buddha because he set out to find the answer to what we could do about suffering. How can we transcend suffering and find some sort of happiness that is lasting, some kind of real happiness? And the Dharma, which is the teachings that explain how to do that, and the Sangha, which is the community of practitioners who practice those teachings. So I will put up on the screen the Refuge Prayer. And we'll do this once in Tibetan, once in English, and then once again in Tibetan. O Sangye Jidan Suki Choknam La Jangchu Badu Dakni Kyapsuji Daki Jinsu Ki Pe Sunam Ki Drola Penchir Sangye Drupasho. Now in English. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and the noble Sangha. Through the merit of accomplishing the 6 perfections, may I achieve awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. And once more in Tibetan. O Sangye Jidan Soki Chognam La Janchu Badu Dakni Kyapsuji Daki Jinso Ki Pe Sunam Ki Drola Penchir Sangye Drupasho. Palden Sawe Lama Rinpoche Daki Jiwo Pede Den Jula Kaden Chabogo Neje Sunte Kusuntogin Yojup Sadhu So. So the backstory of this talk, by the way, I gave it the wrong name. As soon as I had this sort of poetic name picked out that came from the inspiration for this talk, and then when it came, I realized that wasn't the right title. And right before I sent the title in this week, I hit send and I was like, that's probably not the right title, because when we talk about regaining openness, there's nothing to regain. If we haven't lost something, it's not there anymore that we need to get back. So I'm officially retitling this talk at this point, Rediscovering Openness. Furthermore, this topic is big and rich in so many ways. And so this will be part one, and then I will follow up with part two next time around. So the inspiration for this talk was a really, really beautiful description of what we call the 5 Skandas. Skandas means like aggregate or heap. And so that's the main focus of the talk today. And what those are, we'll get into, but it's basically, each of these is a heap, so it's kind of a collection of stuff. And then, there's 5 of them, so that's a collection. And it's this collection all together that we label as I, that we have just kind of decided, you'll see how we just call this I, or another way to look at it is the ego. So it's not really there. The whole thing's a mistake. That's kind of the idea, is like all of this is sort of a big mistake. So I had a good exchange this week in the book discussion group, the Welcoming the Unwelcome Pema Chödrön book discussion group that's been going on. I had a good exchange with somebody about the ego, and we were talking about how it, like, what is it, and it's funny because it isn't, like, so we can really only kind of talk around it and talk about like what happens when we think it's there, but it's not really a thing. And so anyway, it's a concept that's really kind of tricky, and I hadn't heard much about it at KTC. And when I was really inspired by this description from Trungpa Rinpoche about the Skandas, and so I really wanted to share based on that. And as soon as I got into trying to put the talk together for real, I got an idea of probably why we don't talk about this in 1-hour Dharma talks, because it is just such a big topic. And it, when you start talking about the 5 Skandas, you have to talk about the 5 Buddhas. And when you talk about the 5 Buddhas, you have to talk about the 5 wisdoms. And when you talk about the 5 wisdoms, you have to start talking about the 5 mental afflictions. And so it just kind of spider webs out. And that's really good in a way, because there's a lot there to work with and think about, and lots of ways we can try to understand our confusion. So I want to cover, today, just the aggregates, but the broader topic here is the 5 Buddha families. And to me, that was really, everybody has a different experience in 3-year retreat, but to me, the experience of 3-year retreat was really kind of one long exposition of the 5 Buddha families. That's kind of what I took away from that, was that as we did practice after practice, we were given more information and more depth, and the richness of it kind of grew with each practice. And so it is a really profound topic, but there's ways that we can start, like starting points, and just kind of getting an idea about the Skandas is one of the ways. So, and the other thing that's kind of neat about this is, like I said, I was inspired by the Trungpa Rinpoche description, but Trungpa has a very unique way of teaching, and he was one of the first teachers in the West, and really seemed to teach in a way that was very different. But at the same time, he's considered a Mahasiddha and a great master by basically all of my teachers, His Holiness Karmapa, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, Tralag Rinpoche, Trungpa Rinpoche. So he's an extremely realized being, but his teachings are not for everybody all the time, and they weren't for me for a long time. But when they were, they really were. And part of the reason for that was because I realized that, like, a lot of times, we all have different things that are kind of going to activate our awakened potential. We have to kind of meet with the right stuff at the right time in order to have these breakthroughs. And it was the right time for me when I finally came around to Trungpa, and part of the reason for that was because Rinpoche spoke so highly of him, and it was interesting because part of the reason I was avoiding him was because I felt like what Khenpo was teaching was very different from Rinpoche. But I came to realize that with both of them, they're kind of like two sides of the same coin. I mean, and they can seem very different, but like a lot of times for me, when I read on a subject, I'll read several different sources, to kind of get different angles on different subjects. And so to me, a lot of times having more than one view on these things from different teachers helps a lot. And so today's talk is actually going to be based on a commentary by Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche that you can get at Namse Bangso called The Five Buddha Families. And I had this sitting on my shelf, and these commentaries are very thin. They're not books. Like it's sort of towards the end of my shelf, and I just kind of forgot I had it, and I hadn't read this in about 10 years. And somehow earlier this week I remembered, like, I have that commentary, and I pulled this out, and this, thank you, Rinpoche. This brought it all together for me. So I'm basically going to be working from this, and so Rinpoche says here. Just to give a little intro, he says, the subject of this teaching is the five Buddhas, also called the five Buddha families, although it is more proper to speak of the five Buddha potentials, because a family in this sense is a type or species of wisdom that each of us can develop. For a proper understanding of the five Buddhas, it is necessary to first have some basic knowledge about how sentient beings such as ourselves exist. And so to give a little bit of insight into that and to highlight some of what we're going to talk about today, I think it's always a good idea to go over the Four Noble Truths briefly. So the first teaching of the Buddha was the Four Noble Truths. Many of you are probably familiar with this teaching. Always good to revisit it. Your understanding of it will always change over time. And so, the first truth, according to the Buddha, was the truth of suffering, which is that characteristic of our samsaric existence. This existence where we keep experiencing rebirth, we are driven by attachment, and so there's pain and suffering and impermanence. That's kind of our experience, and that's samsara. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But so the Buddha said there is suffering, which is also kind of it's closer to dissatisfaction or dissatisfactoriness. Suffering seems like a really strong word, and that is included, like the real sufferings we have, loss and pain and things like that. But it also is just this sort of background hum of dissatisfaction, dissatisfactoriness. And then the second noble truth is the truth of the cause of suffering. And the Buddha said that cause is attachment or clinging, and in particular, clinging to this idea of a self. So this is kind of really central to what we're talking about today, right? Because I said that the aggregates is what we label as the self. So the Buddha said that the cause of suffering is attachment, or grasping or clinging, and first to this idea of a self. And then because we've done that, when there's an idea of a self, inherently arising with that is the idea of other. You can't have a self without an other. And so that's how we have attachment. If there was no, if we weren't imputing this self and clinging to it, there would be nothing to be attached to. So this cause of suffering, attachment, it's good to know that that's the cause, because if something's causing something else, if you remove the cause, then you remove the result. And so the result is suffering, the first noble truth, and the cause is attachment. So if we remove the cause of suffering, we can achieve the cessation of suffering, which is the third noble truth. And the fourth noble truth is the truth of the path, or the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. And that path is summarized as do no harm, practice only virtue, totally tame your mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha. And I always say that if there's something you're going to memorize that, because like we may get into some complicated stuff today. You've probably already found that things can get pretty complex in the Dharma, but those 4 lines are the overview of the whole shebang. So if your head ever starts to spin a little bit, just come back to do no harm, practice only virtue, tame your mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha. All the stuff, all the other stuff fits into there, and if you hear something and it doesn't align with do no harm, practice only virtue, tame your mind, this is the teaching of the Buddha, then it's not the teaching of the Buddha. So that's a really easy way to kind of sum things up. So in the Four Noble Truths, we've really got two groups. We've got a group of result and cause, and another group of result and cause. We have the result of and cause of samsara in the first Noble Truths, and then in the second, the third, and fourth Noble Truth, we have the result and the cause of nirvana. So each of these, so you see, like with the attachment, that leads to suffering, which is our samsaric experience. And when we follow the path, do no harm, practice only virtue, tame your mind, that leads to nirvana, peace, freedom from suffering. So, and then we're not going to go too far into this today. This will be more of next time's topic, but characteristic of our experience in samsara is the five mental afflictions, which are ignorance, anger, desire, pride, and jealousy. So we'll talk a bit about those today, but that's really going to be more next time. And as I said, the ground path and fruition was what helped me organize this. And again, the ground here is going to be understanding the development of ego and I. So Rinpoche says, we are led to experience the suffering of samsara through our fixation on the existence of the self and through our fixation on all phenomena as real. If our obsession with the self and our fixation on the true existence of phenomena have led us to experience samsara, is there a method for overcoming the experience of samsara? In order to overcome our experience of samsara, we first have to recognize that we are confused, to acknowledge this fact and be aware of it. So long as we acknowledge and recognize this, then there is a possibility of overcoming samsara. Yet if recognizing our confusion makes it possible to overcome the experience of samsara, such recognition is still insufficient by itself. It is only the ground, an intellectual understanding gained from the teachings that must be put into daily practice through meditation, which is the path. Many teachings discuss ground, path, and fruition. The ground is a proper understanding of the teachings. The path is the regular application of the teachings to oneself, and the fruition is the result. This progression of ground, path, and fruition is not hard to understand. First comes the understanding, then the regular application in daily practice, followed by the experience. The result, literally coming face to face with the fruition, is the experience of the five Buddhas. So ground, a lot of times when we talk about ground, we talk about Buddha nature. We talk about like dharmata, like ultimate truth. And that's one way of looking at it. But as many of us have probably found, like understanding or somehow having, like, in any way being able to explain or feel like you've got a grip on ultimate truth beyond duality, non-conceptuality, is very, very hard for us. Like it's not likely that any of us here can do that, you know? So the samsaric way we can look at this is what Rinpoche says here, you know, like gaining this understanding of the way we're confused, how our confusion arises, how this idea of a self has come about, and how we cling to it. And then the path, you know, he said, is meditation, and the result, you know, will be the five Buddhas, or five Buddha potentials. So I want to start with Trungpa Rinpoche's description of dharmata, or this ultimate truth. And this is part of the reason why I really love this, is because I feel like he hits it in such a way that is really unique, and you know, something that's kind of impossible for us to understand until we're Buddhas. So he says, in the development of ego, at the beginning there is basic ground, basic consciousness, open space. There is openness, freedom, and spaciousness all the time. For example, in everyday life, at the first moment we see an object, there is a sudden recognition without logic or conceptualization. We just perceive openness. But immediately we panic and we hurry to try to put something into that openness. We try to find a name or a pigeonhole so that we can locate and categorize that particular thing according to our own ideas and conceptualizations. As that process continues, the ego becomes more and more solid. However, the idea of ego as a solid ongoing entity is illusory. It is a mistaken belief. Although confused mind would like to view itself as solid, it is only a collection of tendencies and events. This collection is referred to as the 5 Skandas, or 5 heaps, and they are form, feeling, perception, conceptions, and consciousness. And I said this, I think, a little earlier, but I want to point out again that like not understanding Dharmata is completely normal for us. I would be shocked if any of us did, because you really don't understand it until you've achieved enlightenment. So that's kind of one of the hurdles I think a lot of us face or continue to face, is we feel like we're just not getting this idea of ultimate truth. And that's completely okay and normal. That's just the way it is until we attain enlightenment. It's more important now that we understand our delusion, because that's our experience. Like that's how we're going to achieve the understanding of the ultimate truth, is through understanding our delusion now, and applying the path, and then we'll achieve the fruition. And at that point, we'll understand the ground as Dharmata, as this open spaciousness. So I'm saying that, and I'm sure many people who are hearing this will still continue to feel frustrated that they're not understanding ultimate truth, myself probably included. But so I'm saying it for my own benefit as well. But like, this is our state. This is our condition. Like right now, we need to focus on how we're confused and what we can do about that confusion. So Rinpoche explains this when he introduces the Skandas. He says, this is his brief overview. He says, visible shape and form are called the aggregate of form. Whatever is sensed or felt belongs to the aggregate of feeling. The aggregate of perception is the category of mental judgments, including the distinctions between good and bad, right and wrong, male and female, and so on, and also the experience of these judgments and distinctions. When we have the perception of what is positive or negative, we try to avoid what we have singled out as negative and adopt what we have singled out as positive. This is the aggregate of conception, which can be understood as an attitude or mental formation related to our experience. The 5th skanda, the aggregate of consciousness, includes the recollection of past pleasure, the experience of what is happening in the present, and the longing for something in the future. Each of us dwells upon memories of the past, the state of the present, and the possibilities of the future. Thus, none of us is apart from these 5 aggregates. And I made a little card so you can see these. So let's talk through this in sort of a real world example. So, we talked about how there's this open space, just complete openness. Our true nature is open, spacious, and relaxed. This is the way Khenpo Tsultrim Jamso describes it. So let's talk about like touching a hot stove. So form would be just the visible form. There's we have this idea of a self, and then there's a form. But this is like before we have named it or even felt it or had any sort of opinion about it. That's the aggregate of form. Then feeling would be the sensation that happens, and it's going to have some kind of quality to it, but we don't really know how to name it yet. It's going to be like seductive or not, But this is just sort of the raw sensation of that feeling. So in terms of like touching a hot stove, that would, be like something not that we wouldn't want to draw towards us, right? But we haven't made that distinction yet at this point in the skandhas, the feeling. When that happens, when we make a distinction, is when we get to perception. So with perception, that's when we start to label things as good or bad, or hot or cold. This is where we start to get these ideas one way or the other about things. We decide, for instance, if we're going to, like, we could say feeling would be like good, bad, neutral. But then when we get to perception, it's like, okay, what are we going to like do with that? You know what I mean? Like it's we name it in a way from our side. And then conception is where we justify that. So like conception is where we go, perception would be where we would want to pull away because that's hot. But conception is where we go, I need to pull away because that's hot, and hot things can burn me. That's what happens when we get to this aggregate of conception. And then consciousness is where we put this all into a story. So we think about when we touched the stove when we were young, and we knew that hurt. And here we did it again today, and we should have been more careful so that we don't do it tomorrow. So that's one sort of real world example after Rinpoche's short overview. And then I want to jump in and give now, like I said, approaching things from some different angles. Now I'll give you Trungpa's description of a few of these. So for form, he says, solidifying space. In the beginning, there is open space belonging to no one, and within that space is primeval intelligence, or vidya. So there is both intelligence and space. And this is, when we talk about emptiness, we usually say, or ultimate truth, we say it has these characteristics of emptiness or limitlessness and lucidity or clarity or intelligence. These are two aspects of something that is beyond duality or conception. So that's what he's saying here. There's both intelligence and space. It is like a completely open and spacious room in which you can dance about and not be afraid of knocking anything over. You are this space. You are one with it, but you become confused. Because it is so spacious, you begin to whirl and dance about. You become too active in the space. As you dance, you want to experience the space more and more, to enjoy the dance and the openness. But at that point, space is no longer space as such. It has become solid space because of your unnecessary urge to contact it. When you try to cling to the space, to grasp it, the whole perspective is completely changed. You have solidified space and made it tangible. That sense of self-consciousness is the birth of duality. Spaciousness has become solid space, and you have begun to identify yourself with the I. You are identified with the duality of I and space, rather than being completely one with space. You have become self-conscious, conscious that you are dancing in space. This is the birth of the first skanda, the skanda of form. Having solidified space, you forget what you have done. Suddenly there's a blackout, a gap. Your intelligence suddenly collapses, and you are completely overwhelmed by ignorance in a kind of reverse enlightenment experience. When you wake up, you become fascinated with your own creation, acting as if you had nothing to do with it, as though you yourself were not the creator of all this solidity. You deliberately ignore the openness and the intelligence. So the intelligent, sharp, precise, flowing, and luminous quality of space becomes static. There is still primeval intelligence, or vidya, but it has been captured and solidified. Therefore, it has become avidya, or ignorance. That blackout of intelligence is the source of the ego. From that sudden blackout, as you continue to explore, gradually things become more and more solid. And that's what's happening as we move through these aggregates. We're kind of strengthening the ego. We're building it out. So when we come to the second skanda, he says, having managed to transform space into solidness, you would then like to possess it and grasp it. Having solidified the duality of self and other, you try to feel the qualities of that other in order to reassure yourself that you exist. You reach out to sense whether that other is seductive, threatening, or neutral. You think that if you can feel something out there, then you must really be here. The mechanism of feeling you set up is extremely efficient. And I like this a lot, this idea that like we check with the outside world to confirm our own self. Like that's how we confirm our ego to ourselves and help to perpetuate this illusion by checking in constantly with the outside world, because if that's there, then we must be here, is what we think. So then, as Rinpoche said, at that point, then perception comes along, which is where we start to make the distinctions between good and bad, right and wrong, male and female, and so on. And we have these experiences of judgment about these things. And then conceptions. Yeah. Conceptions is where we, like I said, it's sort of where we start to justify, because we put a label on the situation. And there's actually a list of like 51 of these things. They're called samskaras, which is another word for conceptions or mental formations. And so this is where we actually like another way to look at it is this fourth skanda of conception is where the drive comes from. Like this is what sort of pushes us to do something about whatever we have seen in form, felt, and then made a perception about. Conception is where we're actually like things are put into motion. That's Trallig Rinpoche says that's like the drive behind the whole thing. And then consciousness, like I said, is where we put this all into a story. We string this all into a narrative. So perception through consciousness is really where we build the ego out. Like that's where we really sort of strengthen everything up, like, cause now it's not just like a feeling, it's a feeling that we've made a distinction about, and then we've made it part of like a concept, and then that concept gets put into the whole story. So the way Trungpa explains consciousness is he says, the last stage of the development of ego is consciousness. Consciousness is an amalgamation of the intuitive intelligence of the skanda of feeling, the energy of the skanda of perception, and the intellectualization of the skanda of conceptions. That combination produces thoughts and emotions. So at the level of the fifth skanda, we find emotional upheavals and the uncontrollable and illogical patterns of discursive thought. With the development of discursive thoughts and fantasies, the whole thing is completely secured. The five skandhas present a complete picture of ego. According to Buddhist psychology, the ego is simply a collection of skandhas or heaps, but actually there is no such thing as ego. It is a brilliant work of art, a product of the intellect, which says, let's give all this a name. Let's call it I. That I is the label that unifies that disorganized and scattered process into one entity. It is very clever, he says. So now let's talk a little bit about ignorance. Rinpoche says that in Dharma, the term ignorant applies to all sentient beings insofar as they take at face value the five aggregates, the five mental afflictions, and the five elements. We'll talk more about this next time. Ignorance means the failure to recognize the actual nature of the aggregates. In this state of ignorance and failing to recognize or acknowledge the true nature of things, we are involved with the confused state of mind. This participation and involvement with delusion leads us to obscure the mind all the more. So it's important to remember that there's nothing to eliminate here. There's nothing wrong with we don't need to rid ourselves of the aggregates, the skandhas. That's not the case. The problem is not the aggregates. The problem is the ignorance. The problem is the confusion. The problem is taking them to be real and taking them to be an entity that we call I. That's the issue. But just understanding that is not enough. And Rinpoche gives a great example of, let's say, he says, let's see, your goal is to travel east, but because of your confused state of mind, you're actually heading west. And then along the way, you bump into somebody who says, and you say, hey, I'm going to the east. And he says, no, you're going to the west. And so just knowing that is important. Like, you have to have that understanding. So that's important. It's a good thing, even if to find out something that you've been doing wrong, because then you know that you were doing it wrong and you can stop doing that. But at that point, you have to then turn around and put the effort in to walk the other direction to get where you were trying to go. So Rinpoche's analogy here, finding out you're going the wrong way is the understanding of the true nature of these aggregates. But then actually putting the effort in to go the other way is the practice. That's the path. That's meditation. So a spiritual path can be explained in terms of meditation, but another way to look at it is the two accumulations. And those are the accumulations of merit and wisdom. And Rinpoche explains merit as, he says, we need the accumulation of merit to remedy, to purify and eliminate our confusion and the mistakes our confusion has led us to make, not to mention the strong habitual patterns these mistakes have developed in us. And for wisdom, he says, the accumulation of wisdom is generally explained as the recognition and realization through meditation that the true nature of the aggregates is the wisdom of the five Buddhas. Even though the two accumulations may be discussed separately, they do not ultimately differ. The accumulation of merit is the removal of habitual patterns that obscure our true nature, and the accumulation of wisdom is this true nature's realization. In terms of this path and merit, we can look at that in terms of body, speech, and mind. So merit, accumulating merit with the body, maybe prostrations, offerings, contributions to helping to build Dharma centers, supporting teachings and teachers, gifts to the poor, any sort of physical action that you take to benefit other beings would be like accumulation of merit with the body. Accumulation of merit with the speech, one easy way to look at it is the four virtuous actions of speech. So we want to speak truthfully. We don't want to lie. We want to speak in a way that brings people together. We want to avoid divisive speech that will, polarize and divide people. So we want to have speech that brings people together. We want to speak in a way that is gentle, not harsh. We want to avoid harsh speech and try to make our speech gentle. And then lastly, we want to speak with purpose and avoid idle chatter. So those are some ways that, and then also, of course, mantra, chanting, prayers, things like that. Accumulation of merit within the mind would be reversing past habitual patterns of attachment, aversion, and ignorance. Most importantly, working to understand emptiness, shunyata. So those are some ways that we work with the accumulation of merit in body, speech, and mind. Accumulation of wisdom involves developing praja, or sherab in Tibetan, which is understanding the true nature of all things. And we talked a little bit about that already. I realize I'm getting a little short on time, so I'm going to not spend too much time on that because, as we said, we're not at a place where we're going to have this true realization of mind just yet, like until we've achieved enlightenment. So the thing to remember is that we really we need to focus on the accumulation of merit is really where we need to put our effort. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But part of the reason we need to do that is because the five Buddhas, like I said earlier, like they're present with us now. Like this is not something that we need to gain or find somewhere and somehow integrate into ourselves. Like we all, they're present in us. And the analogy is like the clouds and the sun. So, you may have a couple cloudy days and then the sun comes out again, but that sun's been there the whole time. It's not a new sun or a different sun. And in this analogy of the clouds and the sun, the clouds are the delusion. And so when we clear away the delusion, then the sun shines through. And the sun in this analogy is like the 5 Buddha potentials. So again, knowing all of this is important. And as Rinpoche describes it here, it's like the ground of this is having this, beginning to have this understanding and thinking about it and contemplating it, and then acting, that's the ground, but it's the acting part, that is the most important. And so in action, we need to be doing things like meditation, accumulation of merit and wisdom. And so again, these 5 Buddha potentials are not separate from us. And Rinpoche has a great section here where he uses an analogy of wood. So I'm going to read this, kind of a long section, but I want to read this. To say that we must make the effort to always engage in meritorious activity is another way of saying that we must make the effort to actualize the accumulation of wisdom. In the process, we come to understand the true nature of things. For example, when the mind is no longer confused, we see the true nature of the 5 aggregates as the 5 Buddhas and experience them as their pure realms. When this confusion disappears, what appears to the confused mind as the 5 aggregates are seen as the 5 Buddhas. How is it that the 5 aggregates can manifest as the realms of the 5 Buddhas? The aggregates are like a pile of wood. If you have a pile of wood and want to be warm, you do not take away the wood, because without wood, there is no fire. Only with the wood present can the flame in its warmth appear. Similarly, the idea of realizing the 5 Buddhas does not imply the disappearance of the 5 aggregates. The 5 aggregates are the instrument for seeing the true nature of things, the key for realizing our Buddha potential. Just as the absence of fire does not mean the absence of the potential of a pile of wood to give us warmth, so our present absence of understanding does not mean the absence of the potential of the 5 mental afflictions to manifest in us as the 5 wisdoms. That's a mouthful, I know it, so let's do it again. Just as the absence of fire does not mean the absence of the potential of a pile of wood to give us warmth, so our present absence of understanding does not mean the absence of the potential of the 5 mental afflictions to manifest in us as the 5 wisdoms. So just because we don't have understanding doesn't mean that the 5 aggregates don't have the potential to manifest as the 5 wisdoms. And so in terms of ground, path, and fruition, we're coming towards the end of the talk. And so I wanted today to focus mostly on the ground and just talking in particular about the 5 aggregates. Next time we'll talk, the second half, we'll talk more about the 5 mental afflictions and the 5 wisdoms. But I do want to give you, since we talked about the ground a little bit, which is understanding those things, and we talked about the path, which is the accumulations of merit and wisdom, I do want to give you a glimpse of the fruition briefly. We'll go into this stuff more detail next time, but I want to just read you Rinpoche's description of the fruition. And if it doesn't make total sense right now, that's okay. We'll get more into it next time. But he says, these are the 5 Buddhas. They are the transmuted 5 aggregates in their pure aspects. Since the 5 aggregates more or less concern form, the 5 Buddhas involve the physical representation of the deities. The mental afflictions are the mental phenomena, so their transmuted pure aspects are the 5 wisdoms. And I want to put a picture up here too. So here's in iconography what we see in terms of the 5 Buddhas. No. So to continue, so the 5 aggregates, since they concern form, the 5 Buddhas are their physical representations. The mental afflictions are the mental phenomena, so their transmuted pure aspects are the 5 wisdoms. So now going through the Skandas, the aggregates, form and ignorance are transformed when we gain understanding, they are transformed into Vairocana, who is white, and wisdom of that which clears away all confusion to unveil the true nature of ignorance. That's also known as Dharmadhatu wisdom. Consciousness, which is the fifth aggregate, and the mental affliction of rage or anger is transformed into Akshobhya, who is blue, and mirror-like wisdom. The second aggregate, feeling, and the mental affliction of pride is transformed into Ratnasambhava, who is yellow, and the wisdom of sameness or equanimity. The third aggregate, perception, and the mental affliction of desire is transformed into Amitabha, who is red, and the wisdom of discernment. Conceptions, the fourth aggregate, and the mental affliction of jealousy is transformed into Amoga Siddhi, who is green, and the all-accomplishing wisdom. Rinpoche says it is through the five skandhas that we are able to begin to rediscover the openness that is our actual state. So it's there like right now, that openness. It's our natural state. It's not separate from us. And it will manifest as the five Buddha families, or as Rinpoche said in the beginning, the five Buddha potentials, when we have accomplished the accumulations of merit and wisdom, thereby clearing away confusion and giving rise to realization. The ground is the understanding, again. The path is the meditation and the accumulations. And the result is the five Buddha potentials. So I have a little bit of time. I probably should have stopped and asked if anybody had any questions along the way, but it looks like we're just getting in by the skin of our teeth before the end of the hour. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. And I'll also say, in terms of the accumulations, that I told this story the other night in the book discussion group, but I had asked Rinpoche at some point in the retreat if I should be trying to sort of attempt to rest in the nature of mind, rest in non-conceptuality, which is another way of describing the accumulation of wisdom. Like that's, resting in non-conceptuality is the accumulation of wisdom. So I had asked him if I should be trying to do that kind of just around the house. And he said, the main thing you should try to do, on the cushion is one thing, but off the cushion, accumulation of merit, like that's the best thing you can do, because it's so hard, even on the cushion, to rest in non-conceptuality that, in general throughout our life, we need to be working on these accumulations of merit through body, speech, and mind. Okay, so I have, hello, Lama Adam. Why are we attracted to or lean towards ignorance? The why there, I think, is related to what Trungpa described as like that moment of panic. And I've also heard other teachers explain it as being overwhelmed by the limitless nature of Dharmata. Like there's a moment where there's just this we become overwhelmed. And so in that moment, it's sort of like if you realize that you don't have any ground anymore, you know what I mean? Like you're going to try to grab some kind of ground, like as quickly as you can. And so in trying to do that, we mistake this limitless aspect of Dharmata as a self, and then the lucid or clear aspect, as an other, like so all this stuff, and then we feel like through having this idea of a self, that's sort of why we talk about openness, right? Because like when we talk about a self, we're already differentiating, and all of a sudden this limitlessness has become a something, and then everything else is a something else. And so we're kind of building up these walls. And in fact, there's actually a talk that I think Trungpa gave about the aggregates that was called the Battle of Ego. And I think he used the analogy of like ramparts and castles and stuff, as like, as a metaphor of like building out our ego with the aggregates. So it's related to that moment of panic. But that is a really profound question. And And I will look into it a little bit more. I'm going to write it down real quick for next time, because that's about as best answer I can give you right now. Could we get this material sent by email in some way? There's the commentary is available at Namsi Bangso. The 5 Skandas I can write out here. I'll put up on the screen again. And other than that, I don't know what else I really want to put out at this point, because this 5, there's 5 of the aggregates, there's 5 of the Buddhas, there's 5 of the wisdoms, there's also 5 elements, and there's 5 seasons, and there's 5 colors, and so it gets a little crazy, and I don't want to anybody to overwhelm themselves. I feel like with the information that we've talked about today, I think just thinking a little bit about that process of the aggregates, and the fact that can be transmuted into the 5 Buddha families would be sufficient for now, and I hope that the talk today motivates people to engage in the accumulations of merit in particular, and to sit down and meditate. Those would be the main things I would hope that today's talk would do. And the next time we'll get more into the details of how all those 5s connect. It's not something that you can't look into or check out, but it gets, like I said, it spiderwebs out into all this other stuff. So I think that a good starting point is just to think about these 5 skandhas. But that's a good question. Thank you, Sally. And thank you, Helder. And thank you, Karma Kunga, and everybody else. So I got to wrap this up. This is a tough topic, and so I want to confess if I made any errors or confused anything, or there's people who go to monastic college for most of their life to try to get a little understanding of this stuff, and I'm just a guy who went into a retreat to practice for 3.5 years. It's a very different thing. Rinpoche explained that to us in retreat, how if you go to Shedra, you go there to learn all kinds of stuff, but you go into retreat to practice. So I the study aspect of this, I'm kind of just a hobbyist. But I hope it was somewhat clear, and I'm grateful to Rinpoche, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, and His Holiness Karmapa, and Lama Kathy, and Lama Tom, and all of our teachers for giving me enough to get to share at least what I did today. And I pray that it was without errors. And I rejoice in all the good works of all of our teachers and all of your practice. And I pray that our teachers remain for a long time and continue to turn the wheel of Dharma. And let's dedicate the merit of listening and thinking about the Dharma today, and all the merit we've attained since beginningless time, and all the merit of all sentient beings to the cause of understanding our confusion. And in understanding our confusion, becoming motivated to practice the path diligently, and through doing so, revealing as already present the 5 Buddha potentials. Okay, thank you, everybody. This was a lot of fun. I'll put one more time up here for if you want to help support the rebuilding of KTC. There's the link. And thank you all very much. I'll be back, I think in the end of May will be part 2 of Rediscovering Openness. Oh, I was thinking of calling this series The Fives. So Rediscovering Openness, The Fives, part 2 will be at the end of May. Good luck, everybody. I'll see you soon. Thank you very much. Take care.